Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new IDontWorkHereLady stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, Karen demands my dog be put down because he looks scary. This happened in the late 90s when I was 9 years old. To give a bit of context so this makes sense, when I was younger my mother rescued and rehomed animals as well as breeding for profit. We weren't like a puppy mill. Most were purebred cats, dogs and horses which had homes lined up before conception. One of the dogs we rescued, when I was about 7 or 8, was a pregnant Great Dane cross bull mastiff who delivered about 5 puppies not long after we rescued her. What we didn't expect was parvo, a highly contagious virus that affects dogs and has a very high mortality rate. I can't remember if the mother had parvo or if the puppies caught it after they were born, but out of all the puppies, only one survived. A boy that we named Tiger. Anyone familiar with the temperament of a Great Dane will understand what sort of dog Tiger was. To call him a gentle giant is an understatement. He had the height of a Great Dane, standing at 28 inches tall, with the shoulders, girth and weight of a bull mastiff, well over 100 pounds, with dark brown stripes all over him. To be totally honest, he looked terrifying but would sooner lick you to death than he would growl or even bark at you, not that I ever heard him bark or growl at anyone. I was 9 when we moved to the town that this took place in. A small town with a church on every corner and a population of 2,000 narrow-minded people. We were a family of 4, me, my younger sister, older brother and our mother, with our entourage of animals, 8 dogs, 2 cats, 3 horses and a few chickens, which soon grew into a small zoo, and a family or atheists moving to a very churchy town. Needless to say, we didn't fit in and stood out like a sore thumb. Now we have that out of the way, on with the story. A few days after moving there, I decided to take Tiger for a walk and have a look around the town. Tiger could be walked without a lead, but as this was a new environment for the both of us, it was safer to put him on a lead. We lived just out of town along a highway, think Pet Cemetery and the cat, so it was about a 10-minute walk to town, and after a 5-minute walk up a hill there's a turn off to a long stretch of road that leads into town. I was halfway down the road when I heard someone shout, "Hey! You! What do you think you're doing with that dog?" There were only 4 or 5 houses along that road with no traffic, so there was nobody else this person could have been yelling at. I looked around and saw a woman out the front of her house walking towards me. Let's call her Karen. This isn't word for word but a summary of how our interaction went. "Karen, you deaf?" I said, "What do you think you're doing with that dog?" "Me, walking him?" "Karen, he's dangerous. You better keep that mutt away from me and my family if you know what's good for ya." I said okay and continued walking. She muttered something as I walked away, but I have no clue what it was. I didn't see her on my walk back home, but we crossed paths about a week later, only this time, she was in her car and Tiger wasn't on a lead. I took the same path as the week before, only this time I was closer to town than our first encounter. I heard a car coming up behind me, so I went to the side and told Tiger to follow. We were walking on the side of the road as Karen came up beside us, rolled down her window and said, "Put the dirty mutt on a lead right now or I'm calling the police." Me, he's fine to be off leash and he's not dangerous. I promise, he's very well behaved. In my state and the area this happened in, it's legal to have a dog off leash if the dog is well behaved and under control by the owner. Karen, he's not fine. He's scaring my kids. She was the only person in the car and I'd never seen her kids. Me, trying to calm her down and reassure her that he's a good dog. "I'm sorry ma'am, but he's a good dog. Look. Tiger's sit. Good boy. Stay." I did this in front of Karen and walked away while Tiger sat in the same spot until I called for him to follow. But do you think this helped to settle the wild Karen? Of course not. "Karen, you better get that dog put down before he kills someone. He's scaring my children." Me, "Your kids aren't even in your car, lady. I'm sorry but I have to go." I continued walking to town in the hope that Karen would leave me alone, but the lunatic followed along beside us for most of the way to town until I somehow managed to lose her by turning into a small side street. I didn't have a mobile phone, so I stopped at a shop to use their phone to call my mum to come get me. The only way home was the road that her house was on, and I certainly didn't want another encounter with her again. I wish I can say that this was the only bad encounter I had with her and other entitled people in that town, but it's not. I have many more I'll post if you're interested in reading them. One involves a horse and a tractor. Thanks for reading. The next one is titled, EK Hurts an Aggressive Service Dog, EP Goes Supernova, Police Are Called. I recently saw a story about entitled kids and horses, and it reminded me of an incident that took place at the end of 2019, pre-COVID. Backstory: a close friend of mine was adopted by a lovely old couple who had already adopted a girl who had been blinded and had major scarring around her eyes. Important. The couple also had big dogs, the latest generation of which was a cross between a half husky, half German shepherd that had had puppies with an Irish wolfhound. So excessively big, very hairy, and absolutely gorgeous dogs. They had one of these puppies trained to be a blind assistance dog for their blind daughter, as well as being trained for general help around the house. During this process, the dog got very close with the blind girl and very protective. Important. Anyways, onto the story. Cast: B, my friend. Z, the blinded girl, my friend's adopted sister. F, friend's adopted father. M, Karen, entitled mother. EK, entitled kid. Me. E, service doggo. The incident: I had gone round to B's house to see her and to get her help with some schoolwork I was doing. After finishing the work, me, B and Z decided to go out for a walk and take E with us to give him his daily exercise, as this would involve going outside. Z put on a headscarf and very large, dark sunglasses to hide her scars, as well as taking her white cane. Together we walked to a nearby park, playing field, and let me off the lead to run him around. After about 20 minutes we noticed a typical Karen and her hell spawn come onto the field. I called E over and put his lead back on him, and also put his service vest on, a high-vis vest with "Service Dog, Do Not Pet" written in big letters on both sides, so it is obvious he is working. E, being very well trained, immediately went into service dog mode and was helping Z navigate around the field. We went and sat on some benches outside the play area, about 10 meters away from M. He sat down about 2 meters away directly in front of our bench. We were just chilling and chatting when we hear squealing and running footsteps. EK had seen E before we could react. EK had sprinted over and charged straight into E, knocking him over and obviously hurting him as he yelped and was frantically wriggling as EK tried to pin him to the ground whilst shouting, "Mummy! Mummy! Look at the doggy!" M didn't move or even look up from her phone. By now E was in obvious distress, and B stood and grabbed the kid, lifting him off the dog and putting him down away from him whilst telling him to please not touch our dog. EK screamed and shouted incoherently, and as soon as B put him down, he punched B straight in the stomach, which made her drop EK, and tried to tackle E again. This time, however, he was ready and shied away, causing EK to trip and start crying. As if summoned by the cries of her hell spawn, M leapt to her feet and began screaming at us. M, what the FCK are you doing? I can't believe you'd hurt child. Etc. All this shouting was freaking Z out, and she started shaking. B, ma'am, your child attacked my sister's service dog. Please can you take him away? M looked at E's vest and said, well, you shouldn't bring your service dog to a public park then, you idiot. Unfortunately, Z chose this moment to speak. Z, guys, can we get out of here? M saw Z's headscarf and glasses and launched into a tirade about disrespect and terrorists and "look at me when I'm talking to you," and grabbed Z's headscarf and glasses, pulled them off her and threw them on the ground. Two things happened nearly instantly. M began screaming in horror at the scars on Z's face. And EK launched himself at E again. This time E snapped. He had been attacked and hurt, and now his child was being threatened. E side-swiped EK in midair. The shoulder charged into M before standing in front of Z, showing his teeth and barking. Still screaming, M pulled out her phone and called the police while dragging her child away and yelling at us that "you're all going to jail for scaring my child and bringing that into a public place." Z was understandably traumatized, so we rang F to come and help us. F and the police arrived at the same time. F came over to us to talk, and the police officer took M's statement, then came to talk to us. After talking to B and F, the police officer asked if he had bitten EK. We all said, no, just knocked him over. The police officer then said that EK had cuts on his arms. Turns out M had deliberately cut her child to make it look like E had bitten him. Whilst we were being questioned, we had been taken about 5 meters away from the bench. M had let EK go back on the park. Z was still sat on the bench and E was lying next to her. EK decided to try again, and came charging over to E. This time however F stepped in and told him that he couldn't touch the dog as he was a service dog. M saw F talking to her child and flew into a rage, shouting about pedophiles and assault, and then shoved F out of the way, grabbed E's lead, knocked Z to the floor and tried to run all in about 5 seconds. As the cops ran to grab her, E launched himself into the air to run back to Z, pulling M over, making her graze her arms. As she was being detained, she was shouting about how he was an aggressive dog and needed to be put down. Only to be told she was being arrested for assault and public order offenses. Long story short, M got fined and 8 months jail time and had to pay F and Z each something close to £5,000 for damages. Z still hates going out and had 2 fractured ribs from EK. The dad came to pick EK up and has since divorced M and got full custody of EK. 6 months after the incident he went to F, B, and Z's house with EK to force him to apologize, which EK did, then explained that his mum told him that was how he should act around dogs. Hopefully the dad can make sure he grows up to not be entitled. The next one is titled, Mother Gets Her Own Daughter a Criminal Record. So, this story goes back a good few years from now. M equals entitled mum, EB equals entitled bully, the daughter, and me equals me and mum equals my mum, cryptic right. So, I have been bullied since I was 4. I'm now 17 and the bullying stopped 1 year ago when I was 16. I have always had to deal with my brother who has brain injuries. I don't say damage because his brain isn't technically damaged. It results in hard times at home, and I have moderate depression and anxiety, so I always just thought the bullying was my fault and kind of accepted it. I was the target of my preschool, primary school and high school. Nobody wanted to be seen with me. So, this girl, EB, has been the main issue and always caused issues. She used to assault her younger brother, her mother, M, and her dad. Her dad is a very nice guy and never did anything wrong. For context, EB was always top of the pyramid, most popular girl. Everything went her way. M always took her side and all the schools said, our students would never do that. And if I retaliated, I ended up in the wrong. All incidents with her were verbal and physical abuse and ended up being leading slander, lying and spreading rumors against me and my mum. I ended up getting used to all this, but my mental state still spiraled more than I realized. My mum ended up drinking to cope. She was never ever an alcoholic, didn't drink huge amounts really, and was never a bad mother. EB soon spread lies that I was abused at home. My mum was an alcoholic and began harassing and assaulting me again when I was about 16. I had enough. One day on the bus I overheard her and another boy, foster child and an absolute dick, talking about me, my mum, dad, brother, and grandparents. All bad things. I turned around and told them to shut up. This was taking place on a public bus to high school. EB, this conversation doesn't concern you. Me, you're talking about me and my family. Shut up or share the conversation with the bus. Boy, well, we were talking about how your brother's a retard, your mum is an alcoholic, your dad is an abusive husband and dad, and your grandparents being delusional. None of this was true. Me, well, you can't talk name, your parents did cocaine and your siblings rammed a Att4cked pole through your thick skull. You have no leg to stand on when it comes to a loving family, so duck off. This boy had also done awful things to me. The boy lowered his head and went silent. EB, you can't say that. Me, well, you can't spread rumors and lies about my family. EB, yes I can. Because it's true. I was shaking and ready to punch her. I did not though. My memory is bad at this point and the argument raged on for a while before. EB, at least my mum loves me and isn't an alcoholic. I was not taking that. Me, well, at least I'm loved more than food. EB, are you calling my mum fat? Me, well, if the boot fits, but let's be honest, it probably wouldn't. She begins ranting and I turn away and start playing on my phone. We get off the bus and EB follows me around school before lessons and hunts me down during break and lunch. Home time arrived and I got to go home on the school minibus because I explained the situation to my head of year who always knew my situations. The next day or two I am back on the bus. Nothing happens. On the trip home, all is fine until we get off at the same spot. EB grabbed a worm, screamed something at me and rammed it down my shirt. I screamed and pushed her away since I have a phobia of bugs and small creatures and dislike being touched on my neck by people. EB, you're wussy. I walk home ignoring the situation and jumping around to get the worm out my shirt. I get in and explain all this to my mum. She was aware of the situation on the bus and all the years prior. One Sunday EB walks past my house. My mum was fed up telling or the teachers. And admittedly she had been to a wine festival an hour beforehand and was not drunk but did smell of alcohol. My mum saw EB walking past my house, dashed out and screamed at her for the past years and recent events. Later that evening we got a call from her and saying some stupid things and how she had called the police. My mum hung up and paid no attention. 2 days later the police came to our door. I was not worried in the slightest. We had not done any wrong. We listened calmly to what they had to say, and I explained everything in the past years and all my school years. They said that judging by our body language compared to theirs, they knew who was lying. A few days later we got a phone call saying EB had a black mark, criminal mark that will be on her records forever, out on her, and the next day we got one police officer explain everything and gave me a sorry card written by EB. It is now in my attic. A few months later that boy from earlier also got a black mark. You would think that's the end, but both of them continued afterwards, but I wasn't bothered and ignored them. They had criminal marks and I didn't. The next one is titled, Adventures in Teaching Kids with Entitled Parents. When I was in my early 20s, I got a job teaching high school at a private institution. This school is one of the most elite and expensive in my country. I am talking full on 1%ers here. I was so happy I got the job. The pay was incredible for a teacher, triple of what I was making at my previous job, with amazing benefits. What I failed to realize is that the incredible salary came with incredibly entitled parents and kids. I lasted a whole semester before I had to get the hell out for my mental health. To this day, I still have PTSD just thinking about the possibility of teaching high school again. Here's a couple of the best stories. I asked the kids to write an essay. I always check for plagiarism. I had a couple of cases of kids just lifting the entire essay off the internet. I immediately failed them in the assignment and talked to them explaining why they cannot do this and how this will affect their future grades and even their future career. Next day, after classes were done, one of the kids' dads slammed my classroom door open and bolted straight at me as I was sitting on my desk. He was full on screaming, frothing at the mouth and everything. How dare you fail my son? You failed him for no reason. I remained very calm and invited him to sit down. I will have you fired. He screamed back. I very calmly opened up one of my desk's drawers and produced 2 documents. Sir, I said as peacefully as I could muster, this is your son's essay. This other paper, I printed from the internet. They are identical. If I report this to the principal, your child could be expelled. The guy stopped on his tracks. Paused, looked at the papers for a second or two, and changing his tone completely, meekly asked, is there anything my son can do to make it up? I replied that his son had failed this assignment, and that he would have to just do better during the rest of the semester. But, if he ever did anything like that again, I would go directly to the principal. Dad's shoulders slumped and he walked away. Now, you might be asking yourself what happened with the other kid that also turned in a downloaded paper. Well, the story also involves an entitled parent. Surprise, surprise. The day after the screaming dad, the other mum calls me over the phone. Of course, she also starts screaming at me. How dare I fail her son, etc. As soon as she let me get a word in edgewise, I told her the same thing I told screaming dad. Her son had turned in a paper that was lifted from the net. Without a beat, she replies, it's not lifted entirely from the internet. I should know. I wrote it myself. I immediately facepalmed. So, you admit that your son did not write the paper? That you wrote it for him? Realizing what she had admitted to, she tried to form coherent words for a minute or two, and then just hung up. Her son still failed the assignment. I have so many other stories, including entitled kids. My favorite entitled kid story is one student, an 11th grader, who came up to me at the tail end of the semester almost crying. This is a kid who did not do any work during the semester, so he was scraping by with a D in the course. He sits next to my desk and says, "Teacher, is there anything we can do to raise my grade to a C? If I get a C, my parents will buy me a new car. If I get a D, they'll just buy me a used car." Future entitled parent in the making. I have not taught high school since then. I moved on to a different field immediately afterwards. I made a career in advertising, which has been fantastic. I came back to teaching a decade or so ago, but now I teach college part-time, sort of a hobby really, because I truly love teaching. The main difference is that now, I don't have to deal with entitled parents. Well, except one. But that's another story for another time. Edit, just because I've been asked a number of times, these are not the only things that happened in my short stint at that school. These are merely a couple of stories regarding entitled parents. My experience there was a nightmare. I was very young and had to go through situations I truthfully wasn't prepared to. And I wasn't the only one. There were 5 new teachers at the school that year, only one lasted more than one semester. Years later, I had the daughter of one of those teachers as my student as a college freshman. She told me her dad, who quit mid-semester, had to go to therapy afterwards. I confessed that I did too. It was a perfect storm of entitled parents, entitled students, pressure from the school administration, and the fact that it was an all-boys school, so I, at 20, was teaching kids that were 3 or 4 years younger than me, so they had little respect for me as a teacher. And I didn't have the experience to deal with it. Today, with a decade and a half of teaching experience, it would have been a completely different experience. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to like, subscribe and post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support Reading Bear.